This is the LUMIX S9. Everybody seems to be getting in a bit of a tangle with it. I've watched a few reviews. I don't think it's an awful camera. It's maybe a little bit overpriced. But out of all the reviews I saw, none of them were testing it with one of these. This is the Atlas Orion 100mm T2 anamorphic lens. So I had these lenses in, I saw this camera come out, emailed LUMIX to see what it would be like shooting with these giant cinema lenses, anamorphic lenses on this tiny little camera. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So the Atlas Orions are huge 2x anamorphic lenses for Super 35 cameras, but they can be adapted onto full frame sensors with their clever little extender, which you can sort of see in between here. They're obviously PL mount. Now, this lens is incredibly heavy, even with the tiny S9 attached to the end of it. There is absolutely no way I'm gonna hold this camera without supporting the lens. So it kind of makes shooting on this setup a little bit ridiculous and very, very challenging because you're pretty much holding the lens the whole time and sort of the camera's basically just hanging off the end of it. The 100mm weighs over 3 kilograms, so that's over 6 times the weight of the little S9. So I think the S9 is around 480 grams. So putting all of that weight and stress on the tiny S9 L mount is not a good idea. So I had to find a way to support that lens, which meant adding rails and a lens support unit. The only problem here was that the camera is so small that even with a base plate on and the rods connected to that, the lens was just too big and I couldn't fit the rods on. So then I had to add a second base plate onto the camera to sort of act as a spacer to lower the rods to fit them under the fat lens. So you can see here that the rods are only just low enough to fit under the lens, which meant when it came to add the lens support unit, I actually had to mount this upside down in order to fit it in. Something to bear in mind if you are thinking of some slightly more exotic rigging solutions for this camera. For the majority of this footage, I actually chose not to shoot in 6K open gate. There's a few reasons for that. I wanted to leave the extender module off the lens mount just to reduce the size of the setup a little bit. But the benefit of doing that also meant that I could shoot in 50 frames a second. When you're shooting in Super 35 mode, you get much better performance and much vastly reduced rolling shutter. And because this was such an awkward setup to shoot on, I just wanted to maximize the amount of usable footage I got. So all this outside stuff was shot on the 14mm lens. Even though it is the smallest of the set, this was still a really awkward setup to shoot on. So nailing focus on this camera was probably the hardest element of this setup. I didn't want to mount a monitor onto this camera. There's only a cold shoe on the top of it and I didn't have a cage, and I just thought adding a monitor, cables and batteries would have just added even more weight to this already awkward setup. It definitely isn't easy, but the benefit of the LUMIX cameras is that you can do de-squeeze in camera, which is great, so you can monitor the anamorphic image. That being said, it is a tiny, tiny sliver of an image to monitor on that screen, so I had to rely on stuff like focus peaking and punch in to focus. I also went to an open day at a local camera store called Cinegear Pro in London, and they were really kind. They let me try out some other silly lenses on this tiny little camera. So we've got a bit of sample footage here of the DZO Pavos. They're also 2x Super 35 anamorphic. I actually quite like them on this camera. I felt they're much more manageable in their size and they were pretty well balanced. They don't perform as nicely as the Atlas Orions. They're a bit funky wide open. So despite all of these difficulties and the awkwardness to shoot with and the frankly terrible British weather, I was pretty impressed with the quality of the images I managed to get. You know, whatever you think of this little camera, and you know, it has really divided opinions on the internet. You have the anamorphic de-squeezing camera, you have the excellent IBIS, anamorphic IBIS, which you can dial in. You can shoot open gate, or you can shoot in Super 35 mode. There are so many options, and all these options are found in the larger S5 II cameras, and they haven't been stripped from this little camera, which is kind of crazy. It's confusing, you know. Would people who want to buy the smaller camera need any of that? I don't know, but you know, they haven't cannibalized it in order to sort of protect the larger cameras, which again is interesting and confusing. So yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend anyone shooting with the Atlas Orions on this little thing. It wasn't really a very pleasant experience, but I think what I wanted to show in this video was that there's been a lot of noise and debate and tempers flaring online, and I kind of just wanted to sort of like get away from that and show you that this camera is a tool and that it can be used to create, you know, pro level anamorphic images. You know, whatever you think about this little camera, Lumix hasn't stripped away any of the features found on, you know, the S5 IIX, and that's what makes it so confusing and interesting at the same time. If you are interested in a longer video just on the S9 and what I think about it a bit more in depth, let me know in the comments down below and I'll consider putting that out. If you're new to this channel, I've got lots of other Lumix related content. I've got long form reviews on the S5 IIX and the S5 II, plus the original S5. Consider checking those out if you're interested in any of those cameras. Hopefully going to be getting your GH7 in at some point to have a look at that. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see about that camera in the comments down below. I'll be doing a full in-depth video on the Atlas Orions themselves. That's in the works, so stay tuned for that if you're interested in them. I'm filming this talking head on the little DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Also planning a video on that in the future too. So anything you want to know about any of this stuff that I've mentioned, just drop me a note in the comments down below and I'll do my best to tackle those questions, take those questions in, answer those questions. But yeah, I'm Ed. Until next time, see you later. Ooh, bit overexposed there. Brush my teeth and dress myself.